We are halfway through 2021, so it's time to go over my personal top picks for the best looking and sounding movies on 4K so far this year. What I did was take my scores per movie and average them out from the lowest to the highest. The one I thought was gonna be number one actually wasn't, so I was a little surprised by that. But anyways, remember, this list is for both audio and video together as a whole, not just for video alone or for audio alone. And the audio has to be in ATMOS or in DTS:X since it's the newest surround format. I know there's going to be a bunch of comments focusing on just how good the video is, but as a complete experience, it's audio and video together. This list is also not going to take into consideration how good or bad the movie is. This, of course, is my subjective list, and yours will surely be different. With that being said, kicking off the list at number 6 is Monster Hunter. We gave this one a 9 for audio and a 9.2 for video. I wasn't expecting too much from this transfer, but it kind of blew me away from how it all turned out. It was shot in 4.5K, it's got a 4K DI, and the aspect ratio is 239:1. It's a Sony transfer, so the odds are it's going to be 4K crispy, and indeed it is. There's no film grain in this since it was all shot digitally, so it's sharp and clean throughout. There's amazing detail whether it's a close-up or a CG creature. You'll get tons of textures everywhere. Sometimes the resolution is so good it makes it easy to see how fake the props are. The HDR usage gives the movie a bright overall look, unlike some transfers where the HDR makes everything all dim. This makes a huge difference for all the scenes that takes place out in the desert, cause visually it looks all hot and bright, and the HDR intensifies all the peak highlights. It also deepens blacks for the darker scenes underground and at night. The ATMOS mix has possibly the most robust bass on this list. If we take a look at the ATMOS viewer, you'll see that this is basically a static mix, so it won't have a bunch of objects dynamically moving through each speaker. It still has some awesome overhead usage during the action parts, and the amount of low frequency extension whenever Diablos makes an appearance should make your subwoofers work overtime. If you need a movie to showcase your home theater, then Monster Hunter should already be in your collection. In at number 5 is Elysium. This is another Sony transfer, so you know you're going to be in for a treat. We gave this a 9 for audio and a 9.5 for video. It was shot in 3.3K and 1080p. It's got a 4K DI with an aspect ratio of 235:1. Elysium came out in 2013, but you probably wouldn't think so by how sharp and clean this transfer is. There's tons of details from within the rundown inner city homes to the mechanical plant that Damon works in. The CG robots are so intricately rendered you might think they were the real deal. The HDR amplifies the hot Los Angeles desert color palette, which gives the movie a very warm look. Specular highlights can get eye-squintingly bright from the LA sunlight to that crazy electric gun. The black levels were spot on and provided great contrast and layer separation. The audio is in Dolby Atmos, and it's a very immersive one. Just like Monster Hunter, it's mostly a static mix with a couple exceptions. When Damon blows up the robot in slow motion, you can track the gunshot as it hits the robot and the thing blows up. Whether it's a big action scene or a quiet one, there's always a nice sense of immersion from every channel. The bass during the explosions can reach ultra low, so be on standby for some impressive infrasonics. I wasn't expecting this movie to look this good or sound this good, but I'm glad to have it in my collection. At number 4 is Zack Snyder's Justice League. You will have to import this one if you're in the US, but per the man himself, it should be releasing on September 7th. I'll leave a link for it down below in the video's description if you do want to pick it up. We gave this a 9.5 for audio and a 9.4 for video. If you're going to have to sit through a 4-hour movie, it's a huge bonus that it looks and sounds awesome. The movie was shot on 35mm with a 4K DI, and it's got an aspect ratio of 1.33. So you will have black bars on the sides of your display, unless you've got a 4x3 television you're still rocking, or if you're watching on an iPad. Now, unlike the first two Snyder DC movies, the Atmos mix on this is static throughout. It's still impressive sounding, but not quite as good as the other ones. There's solid immersion from all the channels, especially from the opening Superman scream that floats through all the speakers. And the action parts, of course, deliver with thunderous explosions. For me, the best part of the audio mix was the soundtrack. It's very different from the theatrical version and sounds amazing in Atmos. The video quality looks just as good as Snyder's other movies, film grain intact and all. I felt it wasn't as grainy as BVS or Man of Steel, but still, there's enough to bother the grain haters. It's got that filmic look about it, so it's not as digitally clean and crisp as the first two movies on the list. There's still great detail to be seen, and the HDR deepens the blacks, which takes the dark gritty color palette to the next level. There's some shoddy CG here and there, but as a whole, this is a visually impressive looking movie. It's like a graphic novel come to life, and it's a must-own if you can get your hands on a copy. Coming in at number 3 is Chaos Walking. This one got a 9.7 for audio and a 9.5 for video. It was shot in 6.5K with the 4K DI, and it's got an aspect ratio of 239:1. I feel like I should have rated the video quality a little higher because this is the crispiest movie on the list. I thought the HDR was fine, but nothing like Monster Hunter or even Justice League. Those movies were definitely more colorful, which makes the HDR colors pop more, whereas this movie is more muted / natural looking. There's still some nice highlights here and there, but it's the detail and the sharpness of the image that is super clean and razor sharp. If you really hate film grain, then you're going to be overjoyed by this transfer. The audio is in Dolby Atmos, and unlike the other movies on this list, Chaos Walking excels with a more nuanced yet subtle yet enveloping atmospheric mix. There's some bombastic moments, but it's the rich outdoor layered effects that surround you in every direction. You can also see by the mix that the objects do move through the soundstage, so it's not a static mix like the others so far on the list. The only thing I felt could have been better was maybe a little more impact in the bass department. Now, if you do need a movie that can show off how sharp and detailed 4K can look, then you might want to give this movie a watch. And it sounds pretty darn good too. At number 2 is Godzilla vs. Kong. We gave this a 9.8 for audio and a 9.6 for video. It was shot in 6.5K and it's got a 4K DI. The aspect ratio is 239:1, and there's also a 3D version. Just a quick thought on the 3D. I didn't think it was as good as Skull Island, but it was better than Godzilla and King of the Monsters. The depth and separation wasn't nearly as good as Skull Island, probably because the movie was a lot brighter, so the different layers seemed to stack better, whereas Godzilla vs. Kong is really dark, and I felt it was just flatter in comparison. So in this particular instance, I'd prefer to watch the 4K over the 3D version. For Skull Island, I'd have to go 3D then 4K. The audio on Godzilla vs. Kong 3D is also not in Atmos. I believe it was 7.1, so that's a no-go after you've heard the Atmos mix. With that being said, this 4K transfer has some crazy HDR colors going on. There's tons of bright vivid neon colors and some eye-blinding specular highlights. The CG creatures looked very good, if not a bit too cartoony if you were to compare them to the previous movies, but they're clean and very detailed nonetheless. Overall, it's not as crisp and sharp as Chaos Walking, but I think most would be impressed by the HDR usage. The audio is in Dolby Atmos, and it's an over-the-top action extravaganza. This has got a legit object-based mix with sound effects that move throughout the different channels. The bass response digs crazy low during the monster fights, and overhead channel activity sees a lot of action. The only negative issue I had was that the dialogue could get drowned out when things got a little too loud. Otherwise, this is a straight demo-worthy mix and should be in your collection if not for the audio alone. And in at number 1, which to be honest maybe shouldn't be number 1 since it's kind of been out for a few years, but they did make some changes and it got a new remaster this year. It's Batman vs. Superman. We gave it a 10 for audio and a 9.6 for video. It was shot on 35mm with a 4K DI. The aspect ratio is 239:1 and 1.43 for the newly included IMAX shots. The audio is in Dolby Atmos and it'll make your speakers work extra hard. The Doomsday battle is straight craziness with effects everywhere with some of the deepest bass response on the list. Just like Justice League, the musical score is a standout companion to all the sound effects traversing through every channel. The movie's got a huge cinematic soundstage and should give you a theatrical immersive bubble from start to finish. The video quality is going to be a love-hate type of thing for a lot of people. If you're a grain hater, you're going to despise this movie. If you're a grain lover, you're going to like the enhanced grain it's got over the older release. The IMAX shots are incredibly detail-rich with crispy 4K resolution, and the color palette got a nice boost in saturation and deeper black levels coming from the original release as well. This doesn't have any eye-candy HDR colors like Godzilla vs. Kong, but there's still some impressive peak highlights and luscious kryptonite greens. Overall, it's a great visual improvement to the older 4K release, and the audio still rocks even after all these years. Once again, if you're a fan of the Snyderverse, then Batman v Superman is an absolute must-have. So that's my list for the best looking and sounding movies on 4K this year so far. Any one of these titles should put any good home theater setup to the test and should reveal just how dynamic your system is. If you're going to tell me something like My Fair Lady should be on the list, come on, man. But that's my list. What's on yours? Leave a comment down below and let us know. Now, if you want to grab any one of these movies, I'll leave some links for them down below in the video's description. As always, guys, thanks for watching. If you want, you can follow us on social media. And if you want to support the channel and get exclusive content or great discounts on audio and video gear, then stop by our Patreon page. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys again in the next video.